flame to burn. One race that I can say I ran.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the 21047.com podcast. My name is Keith Cartwright. I am the host of this show, and I am really glad to have you along listening in today, wherever it is that you're listening, and whenever it is that you might be finding the time to listen in to today's episode. I bring back today my friend Kate Fletcher. Many of you might recall my conversation with Kate last year after she had run 100 miles on the Louisa high school track up in Louisa County here nearby. Kate was running 100 miles to raise some scholarship funds for some of the students that she works with. Some of these students who really just need a break. They probably otherwise wouldn't have much opportunity to go to college if Kate and some of her peers and friends up there in Louisa hadn't rallied around this cause to raise some money to help them out in the form of scholarships. So Kate's been at this. This will be her fourth year. She's taken on a run challenge as sort of the foundation for this fundraising. Last year, actually, the GoFundMe studios out in California came and did a special little short 10-minute documentary movie type. It was really well done. It was a professional looking video. And it was that video that really caught my eye and made me reach out to Kate. And so she's back at it again this year, this Friday, March 29th. She's going to take on another run to raise some scholarship money. And this year it's not 100 miles. It's a little more of a community-based approach this year. She's going to run to all 6 schools in Louisa County. And for those of you listening outside of the state of Virginia, Louisa is not a small county, so she'll cover about 35 miles to get to all of the 6 schools. And in talking with her, you're going to find out it's a little bit more of a hilly route than the 400 trips around the high school track last year. So she's got a little more challenge to it. And also there's a time crunch. She wants to do this within the normal school hours. So she's got about 7 hours to get this thing done. So it may be a little less mileage, but it comes with some unique and additional challenges that she didn't face last year. And as you'll hear in our interview, she's a little uneasy about some of those. And it's pretty cool, actually. I didn't realize it when I was starting my interview with her. But last year we talked after the fact. This year we're talking before the fact. And all of us runners know a little bit of different emotion comes in before and after a race, and that all comes out in our conversation. So I want you to sit back, or if you're out running, whatever you're doing, listening in, enjoy this conversation with Kate Fletcher. Kate, much like me, feels this strong connection, this strong parallel between life and running. So it's always fascinating for me. It's always a pleasure to sit down and really explore this connection more than anything. I find myself discovering new pieces of this connection that I didn't get before talking with Kate. So as much as I love sharing and promoting what a great cause this is for her to get out there and run and raise this scholarship money, it's a real benefit for me to, like I said, dig into and get to know myself a little bit better in terms of this running journey in life. So I'll speak no more. I am going to get you over to my conversation with Kate Fletcher. I have Kate Fletcher here. So Kate, I want to welcome you back to the 21047.com podcast. So welcome back, my friend.
Good to be here. Thank you. Nice to see you as always.
Yeah, so we are going to be talking about Kate's Lions Pride run. And we were talking a little bit before this and I didn't remember this, but we talked last year after your run. And for those who didn't get to hear our conversation last year, you ran 100 miles on the Louisa High School track.
Yes.
So that was 400 laps around a quarter-mile high school track. And you do this to raise scholarship money for some students that we'll talk about as we go on in this conversation. This year, you did a little something different, and we're talking on a different side of this run. We're talking before the run this year. But first, tell us what the run looked, because I remember last year when we were talking, and I said, okay, you ran 100 miles. You seemed like a person that's always kind of, and the first year, how far did you run the first year you did this?
The first year I ran somewhere between 35 and 40 miles, and it wasn't measured properly because I didn't own a Garmin, but it was on the track, and I spent just the school day, about 7 hours running, and I think I ran approximately 40 miles that day. And then the next year, the second Lion Pride run, I decided I wanted to hit 50 miles again on the track, and so I just got started a little earlier, honestly, and it took about 9 hours to run those 50 miles on the track. And then last year, I decided to run all day and night and make it a 24-hour event so that I could hit that 100 miles. But all 3 years have always been on the completely flat Louisa County High School track. And this year is very different because we decided, it's not really just me, it's also Carrie Hicks, who's the organizer of the event, and all of her leadership and newspaper students who are heavily involved in the entire process. And we all thought we'd try something different. And actually, it was a math teacher that thought of the scheme that we are going to enact next Friday, which is that I'm going to run to every school in the Louisa County Public School system. So that's 6 schools in total. And I will start in an elementary school in the western part of the county and then make my way to each school, obviously on the roads, this time not the track, with a police escort and a motorcade. So I'm being well protected, and they are very rural, winding, hilly, emphasis on hilly roads. And when all is said and done, it's going to be about 35 miles on these hilly country roads. And the goal is for me to complete it during the school day. So I'll start in the morning at one school and just need to make it to the final school, the 6th school, before those kids go home at the end of the day.
So I would imagine a lot of folks listening to this, and I know me, pre-runner me, would hear you kind of going through that progression and then this big 24-hour, 100-mile run last year. And then they would say, oh, well, wait, this year she's only doing 35 miles in 7 hours. Kind of an easy deal. But we were talking before we went on air here.
Right.
That's not the way you're looking at it.
I am looking at it that way mentally, but it still feels scary. And that's what I was hoping to talk about a bit today, that these fears and doubts that maybe not every single runner has, but I think a lot of runners have, because I do know that even with the hills, which are, by the way, much bigger in my mind perhaps than they actually are on the road, although they are quite big, I have measured them. But I just know that before an event, these doubts, especially during this taper period where we've stopped running as much as we normally do, and so at least I always feel like I'm not as much of a runner as I was 72 hours ago when I was running every day. I quite quickly shift into someone who doesn't remember exactly what it feels like to be a runner and has these doubts. And I have them every time. And I think they're actually one of the reasons that I stay away from racing a whole lot, because I find them very uncomfortable. But I'm never going to let them come in the way of this run, because this run is so special to me that I do to raise money for scholarships. So there's something I wrestle with, and they come back every year. And I think they're very interesting.
And I'm curious, what that looks like. So you say it's uncomfortable. I'm wrestling. How does that wrestle you?
Right. I guess, and you have to excuse me because I'm an English teacher, and so I'm always thinking metaphors, and the connections between running and real life seem so strong to me. They really blur together. And I think that this is true of me in life as well, that even if I've succeeded at something and accomplished it a number of times, I'm still prone to those doubts in those moments leading up to whatever challenge I'm facing. And I like to think that's just a normal part of the human condition. I feel as though other people experience it, and I think it's actually one of the reasons that we run, because we want to wrestle with those doubts. We want to wrestle with those challenges. We want to overcome them. But the truth is we don't always overcome them. And I want to applaud you for how you dealt with the challenge that you weren't able to overcome in 2018. And you very publicly, because of this podcast and because you have a social media presence, had to struggle through that. And I just want to acknowledge that, how real that feels. Yeah. Yeah. No,
and you make a good point. I'm always, when we talk, you're talking, I'm always thinking that makes sense, because I think there is a lot about running, and then even me personally in life, I'm always kind of looking for that next thing that's going to give me doubts.
Right.
I think that's sort of life or running talking to us
right.
in a way that maybe that's something we're supposed to
right.
take on. My biggest fear is always, whether it's running and more so in life, I think I have more fear today of settling into a place that doesn't scare me. Right. Settling into a place where I'm always just going to do what I know I can do.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that's how I've ended up taking on races that are 37 miles. No. And I'm always wondering what that next piece is.
Right. And you had that race that, was it a similar distance? It was
similar distance. It was the 35-mile Georgia right. Jewel. It was I won't say way different, because the conditions were awful in Kentucky. But Georgia was awful. And I deal much better with, I can run wet all day.
It was so hot in Georgia.
It's so hot. And it was a lot more climbs. There was about 3,000 feet of elevation in Kentucky, but it was all sort of gradual. And in Georgia, it was like, hand me the mountain climbing gear. There would just be bouts of it that would just take everything out of you, and especially with the heat. But so what do you do then? Is there anything, I mean, that's the good thing. It's predictable. So the doubts are coming. It's not like this is a brand new week for you. It's like, oh my goodness, what are these things? It's doubts. I've never. So what do you do then to deal with that, to sort of quiet them, to keep you moving towards this event?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I've mastered that. I think like you were just saying, I accept that they're going to come, and then I'm going to wrestle with them, and that I can certainly distract myself from them. During this taper time, I can go for a walk with my dogs, and I can sleep in, and maybe even watch a movie and spend time with my daughter and cook a nice meal, and all those calming ways that we can spend time, hopefully not dwelling upon what's in front of us, but they are there. And I do think that that's one of the reasons that we choose to run, that we choose to face our doubts. And doubt's just is just a gentle way of saying fears.
Right. Right.
So we face our fears and prove to ourselves that we're willing to face them. Hopefully we prove to ourselves that we're able to overcome them, and we're able to accomplish what we set out to do. And that's an amazing feeling. And when you talked to me last year, I was fully immersed in that feeling because I had just run 100 miles for the first time in my life. Hopefully not the last time. But sometimes we don't overcome them. Sometimes we face our fears and our fears win. I haven't had a whole lot of times where I felt as though my fears won in running. But I can definitely remember a couple of marathons where I just stopped. Not completely. I've always finished a marathon. I've always kept chugging along, but stopped for a time on the side of the road and stood there thinking I could stop right now and get a lift and go back to my car and drive home. And I didn't, but those are really, really hard times. And I think they are absolutely parallel with times that we have in our lives.
Yeah, I said that after this race that I learned something in this race. I had been a lot of times in running, I had been working toward this time and I've been running a lot more miles. We were talking about that beforehand. And in the back of my mind, it's always, I'm going to keep on running until I get to a time where I'm out there and this feels comfortable and easy. And I realized out there that's never going to come because I'm always, number one, I'm always pushing myself to a place where it's uncomfortable.
Right.
And I think, again, that's that refusing to settle in to where it doesn't feel challenging. And then the other thing I learned, and it quickly became a life parallel too, is that running is really about, it's not about learning and figuring out a way to be comfortable in doing it. It's really about mastering what you do when you get uncomfortable. Yes. And I think that's a lot of life. You know, people take things on in life and then they overcome the doubt to start something, whether it's a business or a career change or a relationship change, and then they get the confidence to do that. They don't let fear stand in the way, and then they take it on, and then it gets hard. Yeah. And it's like, wait a minute. I was all ready for this. This one's supposed to feel hard, and then a lot of people stop. And in retrospect, when I look back at Georgia, and I don't know it for sure, but you know, at mile 18, I genuinely was feeling really bad. Right. I mean, the heat had got to me. I was sort of half hallucinating. So, I mean, there was a lot of things going on. It's hard to go
back entirely to that place in your mind and body.
Right. Yeah. But I do wonder, did it really beat me up?
Could you have kept going?
Yeah. Or was that just me not understanding at that time? No, this is, okay, now you know what this is. So now it's about finding something that runs while you're tired. Because you've got beyond the point where you can't do this without getting tired. Yeah. What do you do here? So but I think we're always sort of chasing that.
Yeah. And I want to give credit to runners because there are so many setbacks. Really. It's not like running is something that most of the time you do great and you get a PR or maybe you even win your race. No, you probably never win a race. Yeah. You often have setbacks. I know so many runners who've had injuries that have kept them running for months, if not years. And then they come back and they build back up their strength and they build back up their endurance and they are willing to go through months almost as a beginner again. And there aren't many things in life where you really get set back that far on a regular basis. Yeah. It is a testament, I think, to people who keep going with their running. It would be so much easier to quit. And obviously that's exactly why we don't quit, because we want to see if we can do something that's not easy, something that's hard. And I think in the times that we live, there are so many ways to be comfortable.
Yeah.
And I think there are so many ways to distract and avoid discomfort. And whether that's physically being comfortable at all times, always having a soft, warm bed and a nice warm home and hot water coming out of the taps, or whether that's always surrounding yourself with people who are like-minded, who are always going to agree with you and not challenge you, and maybe staying in a job that's comfortable and no one's going to get rid of you and you can just keep doing the same thing each day. It's quite easy in modern day America for many of us, certainly not all of us, but many, many people, to live relatively comfortably. And I think we're definitely, in my mind, we're losing something through that comfort. And I think runners are just one type of person doing one type of activity that pushes us outside of that comfort, because we want to struggle with our doubts and fears, and we want to do hard things, and maybe, as strange as this sounds, sometimes we even want to fail and then see how we'll respond to that. I
have thought back, and it's all based on this conversation
Right.
we're having right here about running. What running has revealed to me about my past is that nothing in my life meaningful came from a place of comfort.
Right.
And by meaningful, I mean something that really felt like it made me a better person, that
Right.
it made me develop character
Right.
that I'm proud of. And there have been easy times in my life.
Right.
I even think about, I love writing, and, but writing is always a struggle for me.
Right.
I mean, I sit and hash it out, and some of the things that I write that I look back on, and it's very few things, but sometimes I'll end up with something and say, wow, I kind of like that. But it's always the thing where I couldn't get the words, where I'd rewrite, and it's
Right.
just a struggle.
Right.
And so I think that's what running
It's just
teaches a lot of folks. And I see a lot of runners take on life that way too, where they look for the discomfort in life. And so this sort of begs the question a little bit. So you're doing this run, and you've done this now for
This would be the
students,
fourth year.
fourth year to raise scholarship money for students. Now, the reality is you've got a wonderful personality. Folks love you. This cause has, you've brought it dear to the people's hearts around you, and certainly that Louisa community. You could, say I'm doing a spelling bee to raise money. There's a lot of things you could do.
Yeah.
But you take on these really tough challenges
Right.
to help raise money for some kids that are real special to you, and we can talk about that in a little bit too. What's the connection there, do you think?
Yeah, the connection seems so clear to me every time I go running, and when I think about this upcoming course that's so hilly, that I'm helping out students who have struggles. I'm almost feeling as if I'm speaking in cliches, and sports cliches are so common and so
Right.
popular for a reason,
Right.
because sports really lend themselves to a physical representation of what we experience in our daily lives. And these are students who struggle a great deal in all sorts of ways. They come from all different backgrounds, but what they have in common is that they have struggled, and they have persevered, and they have gone the long distance, and they have certainly gone up many hills. And last year when I ran the 100 miles, I was thinking about how far they've come, that they have committed to completing their high school education despite difficulties and obstacles in their way, that they have endured for the long haul, and now they're headed to college and they need this financial assistance to help them get there. And this year, my mind turns to the hill metaphor that they have faced hurdles and hills and climbed them and kept going. And maybe they've had times like I described on the side of the road where I realized, I could quit. I could get away with this. I could quit and just do the easier thing. But they haven't quit. They've kept going and found their way through the first stage of their lives and need this little extra piece that I can provide them through the Lion Pride Scholarship to make their way to college to the next distance. Yes. The next set of hills. Yes.
Right. And so talk to us a little bit about who these students are, why this group of students has become special to you, why you would take this run on every year, why you are actively raising money to support them.
Sure. So I've been a teacher at Louisa County High School for 14 years, and I have worked with all types of students, and I've taught honors classes, and I've taught what we call the general English classes, and I've taught some remedial classes. And at every level, with all groups, through all those years, I have seen many students who have unique challenges. And there's not one type of challenge. There's all kinds of challenges because it's a diverse group of human beings. Some of them with financial situations, some of them with family situations, some of them maybe with learning disabilities, every struggle that you can imagine a young person in America would face. And I've always wanted to help them, obviously, and I've been their teacher, so I've helped them in that way. But it occurred to me 4 years ago that I could take this other passion I have for running and combine it with my teaching of these students and find a way to help them beyond the classroom. And the reason I choose them is that while I have wonderful students who maybe don't face so many hardships, I know that those students will be taken care of. I know that they have family support that will carry them along, and I know that they may have access to other kinds of funds and scholarships. But I felt there was a need for students who might not always have those kinds of resources, who are excellent students. And I do want to speak to that for a moment, that these students are struggling sometimes in ways that you would never guess based upon their abilities in the classroom and the amount of work that they're completing and their passion for their education. So they're very, very impressive students and caring people and committed to what they see in their future, who are at the same time finding their way through these obstacles. And so it seemed like something that I could do and wanted to do. And as I've done it, I've only grown more in my commitment to it because it's been so clear to me that it's worthwhile for me, for them, for the school, for the community.
Yeah. So I find it interesting. I mean, you're going to go out and run 35 miles in 7 hours. So to me, that's a fast run, and you're going to have stops along the way. And
at each school, I'll run with the kids and do some high fives and a little bit of, some media. I'll have pictures taken and speak to some people at each school, and I'm looking forward to that part very much.
Right, but you're going to have to run fast, and you are a fast runner. You've run the Richmond Marathon is pretty much your regular race, and I know you can run that in 3.5 hours or so, which is
approximately
speedy fast.
Not my fastest, yeah.
Right, and so, but you don't race much. I mean, a lot of runners I talk with runners who'll run 20 races this year or more, and a lot of their running is pointed from race to race.
Right.
That's not your deal, but here we continue to talk about how you pour so much of your running into this event. I'm curious where that all sort of plays out. Why why this is the big thing, and
Right.
why, when you really could be out there collecting a lot of medals and placing in your age groups and a lot of
Right.
these things that you'll see on Facebook every week.
Right.
That's not you.
It really isn't. And we were talking earlier, and I admitted that there's part of me that wishes it was me, because I know I would probably be a faster runner if I could be motivated by those extrinsic rewards. I just don't have it in me. I have looked for it. I really have. And there was a time, of course, before the Lion Pride run where I was still running the Richmond Marathon, and I did always have a hard time finding my reason for racing. And I've never had a hard time finding my reason for running. I was about to say I've always loved running, and that would be inaccurate because sometimes I curse running, and sometimes running is very hard,
Yeah.
but I've always felt a strong relationship with running. Running has for many years at this point, for over a decade, meant so many things to me intrinsically. But to me, that is completely separate from racing, almost like a different animal, apples and bananas, not the same thing at all. And one of the reasons I've raced so little is that I think I've primarily done it to stay in shape for the more meaningful reasons, to me more meaningful. And I'm not, I want to be careful and not in any way discount the people who love racing, and they are guided by their own reasons, and we each have our own reasons, and we can't fully understand someone else's experience of anything in this life, and running is just something else that is different to each person. But at this point, I am running the Richmond Marathon in large part to stay in shape so I can do the Lion Pride run. And even before the Lion Pride run, I was running the Richmond Marathon primarily to stay in shape so I could run, so that I could run as much as I wanted to for the reasons that are intrinsic inside of me, not for the medal or the blanket, which my dogs have enjoyed very much. They have a collection of Richmond Marathon blankets that I tuck them in under every single night. But I really have never cared that much about speed, and I think I've said I only recently even got a Garmin. I've never, ever worn a watch during the Richmond Marathon. Even now that I own one, I still don't wear a watch during it. I have a hard time focusing on speed, and I've never done speed work, and that's a perfect example of something that I'm neglecting that would make me a faster runner. I just can't. I can't seem to find the motivation for that.
Yeah.
Because I can't find the reason why that would feel valuable to me beyond making me a faster racer, and because that end result isn't that important to me, it's hard to inspire myself.
Well, and that feeds into, so last week I was at this training for work, and we certainly weren't talking about running, but we got into this conversation that, to really make the biggest impact with your what. And so the what was this job we're doing or this role we have within the organization.
Right.
To really make the biggest impact you can with the what, you really have to have a clear understanding of your why.
Right.
And of course, I'm sitting there thinking, "Oh my God, we are talking about running.
We're always talking about running.
We're talking about running. I knew
about
we'd
running.
get here, but I'm sitting here listening to you, and it's the first time I ever really thought of. And I'm like you. I want to be careful. I don't want to put every runner in this category,
Right.
but running and racing can really be two completely different whats.
Yes.
Because the next piece they talked about was, so when you understand this what, and the what's pretty easy to figure out. I've got this job, or I'm doing this run or this race. But when you really understand the why, putting that together with your what puts you in the best position possible to pursue your purpose.
Right.
And I think that's just listening to you talking about racing and running. Those can really be way different pieces, and it's doesn't mean to say one better than the other, but I think these kids have really become your why.
Absolutely.
And I think that's why it makes it easier for you to find the reason to get out there and run.
And it's interesting you talking about work, because it actually made me just think about long ago when I was young, when I was in college, and I was an English major, and I did not know what I was going to do with my life. And my mother had been an English teacher, and my father was a professor, and both my grandparents on my mother's side had been teachers. So there was this history, which meant that, of course, I would not even consider becoming a teacher. And I hadn't considered being a teacher. And so the time came in my junior year to start thinking about what would I do with this English major. And I thought, well, I could work in publishing. And so I went for a semester abroad to London, and I worked at a very fancy publishing company right in Piccadilly Circus. So it was a young person's dream. You know, I stayed in a flat, and I got on the tube in the morning, and I went to this pretty upscale publishing house right in the middle of London. And I have never been more depressed in my life. I was miserable. And the reason was that I was using my one skill, writing, to do something that I didn't believe in. So I was using, and at that time I wasn't a runner, so writing was my one skill. I hadn't added running. Now I have two skills. But my writing was a skill that I had, and I was using it to sell things that I didn't believe in. And what I mean by that, it wasn't that I was working for an advertising company, but I was working for a publishing company, and I wrote a couple of articles, and I helped with some little things, but ultimately the magazine was in existence for the advertising space. So it was a free magazine that was given to homes in a certain neighborhood in London that was hand delivered to their door. And of course it contained many advertising pages. And so all of the articles were geared towards supporting those companies that were at the center of this magazine. And I remember writing an article about a chandelier. I wrote an article actually about a gym that was in a converted church, where I went for a visit and I saw people worshiping their bodies in this beautiful church in front of these stained glass windows. They were on machines looking in mirrors at themselves, and it just felt so wrong.
Right.
And I was writing these articles about these things that I didn't really believe in, and using this small gift I had for words to do something that felt so pointless and meaningless to me. It felt so empty. And so it was a great experience to find that out when you're 20. And I'm sure that if I'd stayed in publishing long enough, I would have found a niche that didn't feel so empty to me.
Yeah.
But instead, I ended up taking a completely different road, and I'm now a teacher, and I use that gift to help students become writers and to help students understand the power of the written word, both theirs and the words of the writers that we read and discuss in class. And it just feels so much more meaningful to me. And I think that the parallel with my running life is that the races are a bit like that publishing company job,
right,
where people were awarded with more writing assignments and their name in the headline. And obviously, if I had been a paid employee and not just an intern, there would have been that kind of status. But it just didn't mean much to me. And I similarly don't find much sense of purpose in the racing, but I definitely find it in this run that I do in support of these students who I know and care about. It feels much more personal to me.
Yeah, and so as you were talking, I love the whole selling, because really we are, when we're running, you're this run you're going to do. And what's the date of the run?
March
again?
29th.
March 29th. So March 29th, you're going out there and running, and you really are selling. I mean, there's a couple of things I'm thinking right now that you're selling with this run. You know, maybe first and foremost, you're selling these kids on belief that you believe enough in them to go out and do this.
Right.
But you're also raising money. So you're selling us on the idea that these kids are important enough for us to believe in too. Right. You're really trying to sell us on this emotional connection to them that you have. And I know that's when I would have never got through my run last weekend if I wasn't running for these young kids in Pontiac, Illinois, this special education class that I've just become attached to. At the end, it would have been real easy to quit, but then I thought, well, now I'm thinking that would have gave up on the sale, you know, like the salesman saying, okay, clearly you're not going to buy this. I quit, so I'll move on. But I think it's a great question to ask when we're out there running or when we're fighting for anything in life. What am I selling here? And sometimes we're just trying to sell ourselves, because I do race, unlike you, and I'm constantly I know one of the things I'm always selling myself on, especially in racing, and for me more and more it's about distance and not time, but you know, I'm 55 years old, so I'm constantly selling myself on this idea. Oh no, I can still do this, right? I'm 55 and I've only been running 5 years, but at 55, I'm running faster than I did 5 years ago when I started. So I'm selling myself on that too. But I think that goes back to the why. Why am I in this?
Yeah, that's valuable to you.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of fuels the run. So, and we'll share when I publish this where folks can go. Contribute, because I think you're doing a good job of selling the emotional connection. Is there a part of your life that really makes you relate to these kids in a way that maybe other people don't? Is curious just where that connection comes from, if it's any deeper than you clearly have an empathy for them. You have this capacity, it seems, to be able to walk in their shoes, to understand their hills a little bit.
Right. I think a big part of it is just knowing them, you know, getting to know them, as well as teachers really do get to know their students if they're even just a little bit open to them. It just all comes flooding in, and you can't help but care about these people because you're spending time with them every day and getting to know them. And especially maybe as an English teacher, because of course they speak in class and we have discussions and we talk about ideas that are in books and they write for me. And so I really get to know their thoughts and their feelings in a way that maybe I wouldn't if I was a different kind of a teacher. So I genuinely know them and care about them. And I do relate to them for sure, both from when I was their age and even as an adult with struggles. I've definitely had my own hills in my life, and have been grateful for the people that I can say were supportive and understood me and cared and listened. Yeah. And I want to be one of those people. I certainly want them to remember me as a person who cared for them.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting, and I can't remember if we talked about this while we were recording last time or if it was after we were done recording, but you told me I needed to read the book Born to Run, and you boldly said you read it, it'll change your life. And so I was like, okay, she's an English teacher, reads a lot of books. I'm going to have to get this book and read it. And I did, and it did. It was really an impactful book. But it did strike me, and it's even striking me even stronger as you're talking right now, that so one of the pieces in this book that really got me is, so it's fairly beginning of the book, and there's a coach, Joe Vigil, who's one of the most famous running coaches, some say the best running coach ever, and he's sort of trying to figure out the secret to running. And so through a lot of circumstances, we get this group of the Tarahumara runners, or indigenous Americans living in Mexico, and they just have this sort of mysterious group of people who are just known to be natural born runners and barefoot runners. And so they're coming to the Leadville race. I think it's in Colorado. And back, this is like in the 80s or something. It was like the ultra race. Now they're everywhere. Yeah. Anyhow, Joe Vigil is anxious to watch these people because he's trying to really figure out the secret to running. And he's big into data, the oxygen levels, and all of these things. And so he's watching the Tarahumara runners. And again, everybody should read the book, but he comes to this conclusion that their secret is love.
Yes.
Their secret to running is love. And he's not talking like love of running. He's talking compassion, like you were just talking, caring, loving. And so I couldn't, in the framework of this conversation about really understanding your why, I just asked you what your connection with these kids was, and in about 3 different ways you said, I really care about them. I listen to them, I understand them, I care about them. What, for people who aren't runners and would be listening to this conversation,
where did that connection
and I'm going to
get
say, I'm going to say, if you want to be a better runner, you have to learn to love people better. You have to learn to be more compassionate. I mean, for some people, and probably for a lot of runners, like, where is that? Where is that connection, do you think?
Yeah, I think when we let ourselves become uncomfortable and we really allow ourselves to feel every emotion that comes during a long, hard run, I think that gives us an empathy. I think that allows us to experience metaphorically, again, English teacher, the struggles that are part of all of our lives. And we're feeling it in a very physical, raw way, because there are lots of ways you can represent human struggle. And as an English teacher, that's what literature does, right? That's what every that's what every piece of fiction strives to do. That's what every poem strives to do. That's what every play strives to do, to represent these universal human struggles. And we can, for instance, in a play, take characters and plot, and we can put them on a stage as the writer of a play. And, I'm sure, for instance, Shakespeare maybe felt that he was doing this, that he was taking our universal human struggles and he was putting them upon a stage, and he was moving this piece of the experience to the stage left and this part of the experience stage right, and then he was having them come into conflict and all of the repercussions and consequences. And that is absolutely one way to represent our struggles. But I think in our modern day world, we need more than just a mental representation. We need the actual raw physical experience of that kind of hardship and endurance. And running is one way to tap into that and really feel a part of that larger human experience. I think essentially, running is a way to feel truly alive with everything that means. And obviously that includes joy and hope, but it also includes fear and disappointment and pain and sorrow. And every time that we go on a really long run, I think we experience those highs and lows, again, the hills, that enable us to connect with that larger human experience and remember what it means to truly, truly be alive. And I know that in my modern life, because I am most of the time not running, I'm most of the time going about all the other parts of human business in the year 2019.
Right.
In most of my life, I'm shielded from those struggles. I am relatively comfortable. I work in a modern building with electricity and heat, and I'm fed, and I can easily take care of my basic needs in a moment because everything's so convenient. And then I get into my vehicle and drive incredible distances, really,
Right.
distances that would have taken someone days and days and days to travel by foot. And everything is so easy. And it's not that I'm extraordinarily fortunate, but as a person living in the United States of America in this time period, it's so easy to not be grateful and to take it all for granted and to just assume that I should be able to get into my car and whiz home and go by a coffee shop and get a delicious beverage and go home to my warm house and sit on a plush couch. And running is a daily reminder if we choose to do it. And there are other reminders. I'm not trying to say that running is the only way, but running is a daily reminder of what we can actually be grateful for, that we are part of this scary, beautiful human experience, and that we can take on these challenges and maybe succeed, maybe not, but live again to do it all another day. Yeah. And I think the Tarahumara, when Joe Vigil saw them smiling, I remember exactly the part in the book you're talking about where he was shocked. He saw them come up and over a hill. And I need to remember this on those hills.
Yes.
He saw them come up and over a hill, and to his absolute surprise, they were smiling. Yeah. And they were smiling, I think, to be alive. Yeah. Yeah. And to be feeling that they were alive. To be right there in the midst of that experience, fully in tune with their bodies as they felt all the things we're capable of feeling that we so often blunt and don't want to feel and protect ourselves from.
As you were talking, I was remembering back a podcast I did last year with Jenny Baker. She's the race director for the Georgia
I heard
Jewel.
that one, yes.
And, I asked her, as a race director of that race, I asked her, what's the most meaningful part to you of being the race director? And I really thought she would say, the number of people I get to see finish 100 miles for the first time, or people overcoming things they never believed they could overcome. Right. But she said the most meaningful part of being the race director of this race is I get to see people get really vulnerable and have some real honest conversations with one another. Right. And again, it's like, now wait a minute. Where does that?
Right.
But now that I've done it,
right.
And in this conversation, it is so true.
And you'd think that you could access that all the time, that you could just turn to the person on the street and have that conversation, or pick up your phone and have that conversation. But the truth is, I think those conversations don't happen as often as we would like them to, or as they could. And maybe even when you're running, you might not be putting on a race, and you might not even be running with a friend. Sometimes that's just a conversation you have with yourself.
Right.
A lot of times that's probably just a conversation you have with yourself when you're running that you wouldn't necessarily have with yourself. I think we go through life so often not having those really important conversations with ourselves, whether they're full of doubts or full of hope or full of feelings of accomplishment once we've done something that we didn't know we could do. But running at all those different stages and in all those different ways gives us an opportunity to have those conversations.
So you had a conversation a little bit earlier here I'm going to go back to, because it kind of was thrown out there and then we moved on. But you were talking about the 100-mile race that you did, and then you kind of threw in there as a sidebar, I hope it wasn't my last one, and then you moved on. So you have a hope or a plan to run another 100-mile race, or what is this picture of your running? I was curious. That caught me. Where does that come from?
I would like to do another one. And I think I would like to do it for the school. I don't know if that's in the future. I think it certainly could be if I wanted to make it happen. But it was such a powerful experience for me to go. Gosh, it is hard to put into words. And it's very much like your friend put it, to have such I want to say a deep experience, but I think we have lots of experiences in life that might qualify as quote unquote deep. It was just such a extended journey within myself I had to go so deeply inside of my willpower and my hope and my love and that human experience for such an extended period of time, that it's hard to recreate that without actually doing it again. I mean, almost like a pilgrimage, just a journey of that magnitude carries with it, I think, certain potential that is hard to replicate elsewhere.
Yeah, there's
in other ways.
For about the past, I don't know, year, maybe not quite that long, but there's probably not a day goes by where I don't think about running 100 miles. I don't know if it's just this thing that's got in my head that's just the next goal, and then when I do it, then it'll be like 200 miles. But there just is something about it. Even after I nearly died at the end of 37 miles, and I'm doing the quick math, okay, only 63 miles to go after this, and measuring the lunacy of it, by the time I was driving home the next day, it was okay. To me, that race really was one more step toward 100 miles. But I think it really is. I've said it all along. I mean, it's just, one, the distance physically is beyond anything I can imagine. Certainly right now, I'm a guy who couldn't run 35 miles last summer, barely made 37 a couple of weekends ago. So that's clearly a big reach. Right. The mental piece of it, I remember we ran, and I told this on another podcast I did after we ran the Oxbow Ultra last November. And I remember we ran the 12 hours and we only ended up running like 10 and a half hours because there was no way we could do one more loop, and they kind of stopped us. But we passed this woman. She was running by herself. It was cold. It was Thanksgiving weekend. Right. She was running the 24-hour, and it was 7:00 at night, and like we're cold,
she was only halfway
and done, and she wasn't even halfway. And I put myself in her mind for a minute, right? Like what would I be thinking right now if I knew I had to do this all night by myself in the cold.
Yeah.
I'm not even halfway done. And so there's that mental piece to it. It's not like you just make a decision and, okay, I can do this. There's like a constant mental.
And you don't know that you can do it. And that's
Right.
the thing. We started this conversation about doubts.
Right.
And last year, you just happened to interview me after the run.
Right.
And so we didn't focus on those doubts, but I was full of fears. I was absolutely full of fears going into that run. And I wouldn't do away with them. I think that was the whole reason I was doing the run, was to face those fears. I think that lady that you saw running in the dark for 12 hours was right in the thick of it. And I'm sure there were some thoughts that we might on the outside define as negative, but if you're facing those negative thoughts and feelings and having a conversation with them, then obviously that's a positive. That's
right.
Yes, there is a struggle there, but it's the way to something else beyond.
Right.
And there's something gained from that struggle.
Yeah.
Right? The struggle isn't in the way. The struggle is the way.
Right.
Yeah.
Now I've come, and for me, it's from my faith and spiritual side of things. And I absolutely, I believe there's a God that has this ultimate purpose that he's calling me to and working every day to keep me moving toward it. But I also believe that there's this evil side of this world, that there is a devil who absolutely has no interest in me getting. I mean, his primary goal is you cannot get there. I lose if you get to what his purpose is. And so he's constantly working to keep me away from it. And where I've come to associate this with running is that if, and in life, I know in a moment where, like, I'm just moving through life and I don't feel any resistance to what I'm doing. I'm like, I'm not moving in the right direction. Because if I was moving toward this purpose that I feel called toward, then the devil be working just nonstop to pull. He'd be throwing everything in the way. And I think about that in running all the time. It's like, once you kind of get moving, that resistance comes in. And I know, like at 7 o'clock at night when it just gets dark and I know I'm not even half done, that resistance is going to keep coming. Because I always say, like the running God is saying, man, you're going to do this, you're going to do it. But then there's this evil force that does not want you, because good things happen when you do that. When I crossed that finish line last weekend, I was a different me.
And you'll remain a different you.
Right.
Like, that's permanent.
Right.
That's permanent.
And it's not the buckle. I got the buckle. And in a moment, that's very symbolic of you just did this thing. And it means a lot. But when I look at it, it won't mean 37 miles. It'll mean knee-high mud. It'll mean trees falling down. It'll mean at mile 30 when in the back of my head, I'm hoping, like when we get out of these woods, somebody will just say it's too dark for y'all to finish. We're going to drive you. I mean, that's where my resistance was. And my friend Nicole was up front saying, oh, no, they ain't pulling us off this course. And I'm thinking, maybe somebody will like kidnap her and I won't have to listen to it. But what it signified, and I wrote about this not too long ago, is that I think resistance is always there if we're moving in the right direction. But it's really up to us whether resistance stays just resistance or if it becomes a wall in our life. And it becomes a wall when we just listen, it gets too loud, and we say, you're right, resistance, I can't do this anymore. Right.
And somewhere there's a narrow passageway, because of course, the easiest thing to do is not to face the resistance at all, and just not do the run, not do the hard work, not challenge ourselves in all kinds of areas of our lives, every possible area. And then the option that you're talking about is to attempt it, but then be defeated by that wall. And somewhere there is that passageway that we find around it. And it might mean that the wall stops us sometimes. In fact, I think it's hard to be a runner for a long period of time and not occasionally be defeated by the wall. And that doesn't mean it's the end in any way, just like you learned last fall. And how I felt what those times that I pulled off the side of a marathon and stood on the road and realized that I had an option and that no one would even notice if I quietly slipped away and walked towards the location of my vehicle. But the gains from finding our way through are so strong, and I can't imagine my life without them.
Yeah. No, it really is sort of reversing thinking. And I can remember I lived a large part of my life where resistance meant no. Resistance meant stop. My mind had been trained when the resistance came.
Of course you should stop.
That means, okay, I shouldn't go. But now, and I credit running. Mm-hmm. When resistance comes, and it doesn't mean I'm always great at responding, go.
Right.
But when I feel the stronger the resistance I feel, the more I know I'm supposed to take another step.
Right.
The more I'm supposed to go. And I use this example all the time. This podcast is an example. After I ran the Richmond Marathon, this idea came to me, and of course the resistance said, "You idiot! You don't even own a microphone. You've never interviewed anybody. All these things." It's like the more I heard that was like, okay, well then I need to buy a microphone. You know, I need to just ask somebody if I can interview them. And that's what running is meant to me. It's this whole idea of retraining my mind and how I approach resistance. And I think it goes all the way back to these wonderful kids that you're running for.
Yeah. And, my empathy goes out to them because it's a long time ago for me. But I do remember being a young person and having these feelings for the first time. First having that sense that I was facing a wall. First having that sense that I'd bitten off more than I can chew. First feeling as though my doubts were going to swallow me whole. And not having had the life experiences to know, oh, your doubts will be ever present, but they won't swallow you whole. You will meet many walls and you will eventually find your way around them. But young people haven't had those experiences. Sometimes this is the first time that they've faced substantial difficulties. And the fact that they're able to succeed and find a way and cope and manage definitely impresses me.
Yeah.
And makes me want to help them with that. Makes me want to help them in their drive to do that. And I wasn't that kind of teenager, to be completely honest. I was very much someone who quit pretty easily. I wasn't a terrible student, but I was definitely an underachiever. I remember being a huge procrastinator, which is something that I still struggle with. I did not have that kind of conviction that I see in some of these students who are applying for the Lion Pride Scholarship in the spring, and they have already discovered how to get past those walls the very first time that they may have even encountered those kinds of challenges. I don't know, it took me decades. Yeah. It took me decades to become a person who wanted to face the resistance, who wanted to struggle with doubts, who wanted to be uncomfortable. And yet, these students who we're awarding the scholarships to already somehow know that they can survive the discomfort, that they can push beyond their doubts.
Yeah, sadly, because a lot of them probably have grown up in resistance like none of us will ever know. Right. So they would look at the pain I feel at mile 30 and
exactly.
no big
Right.
No big deal. So on one hand, they're fortunate to have had some of the, and again, it's sort of a crazy way to have to look at life. But
Right.
again, when you look back and see that most of the meaningful things that come our way or that we achieve
Right.
come through hard times, not through easy times.
Yeah.
But what you're doing, what a lot of these young people are all often missing, is the break that a lot of other folks get through resources, through family, through their situation. So I'm grateful that you fight to give folks who clearly are, they've already demonstrated they can climb the hills, conquer the hills, beat the resistance. They're just saying, will somebody just give us a chance, give us a break? And I think that's what you do with this. And I'm just
and despite all of my doubts, I know I am going to succeed. I know I am going to climb all of those hills, and I will feel resistance, and I will feel pain, and I will experience the struggle. But I will be absolutely thinking of those kids and make it all the way through to the end.
Yeah.
And if we speak in a couple of weeks, I know I'll be telling you the other side of this universal story, this classic tale of hills and hardships overcome. And there will be some very dark times over the course of those 35 miles, as there always are. Yeah. And I will think of this conversation, and I will think of those students, and I will think of the times in my life that I've already proven to myself that I can overcome and I can survive the discomfort. And I will think of you both in Georgia and more recently in Kentucky, and all of that will help me.
Yeah.
And that's what I think the Tarahumara were thinking when they were smiling as they crested that hill. And he wrote about them in the book. That's what he meant when he said that what motivated them was love.
Yeah. No. Well, we love you, and I know you're going to do great, and I have a lot of respect for your why, and I think the purpose is, and you shared some stories last time about kids' lives they've been filled with gratitude for the chance that they've had. So you're going to do great. I know there's a lot of folks who were asking. They were reaching out when we kind of started talking about this. Can we come run with her? Can we come?
I know that's been one of the parts that has made me a little sad about leaving the track, because there have been a lot of people who've reached out to me who've run with me on the track over these years, and their company has been such a support. I can't imagine running those 100 miles without all those kids and people from the community all day and all night by my side. And this will be different in that sense, but they will be with me. They will absolutely be with me in spirit. And I know that I am not alone when I'm doing this run. I'm absolutely surrounded by love and support.
Well, we'll be following you. And what a cool deal. You get a police escort. So it's not like a race scene, but a motorized escort. I mean, how cool is that?
And actually, the police officer on the motorcycle behind me is an old student of mine. That's how long I've been teaching now. The police officer who's going to be backing up this whole event is a guy that I taught about 13 years ago. Mm-hmm.
Okay, well.
Yeah, teaching in a small town.
Well, that's good. Well, best luck, and thanks for coming back and sharing. I always love talking to you, because you get this piece, at least where I come from, it where there's just this direct connection between running and life, and it's always fun talking to you.
I have a hard time just seeing running just as running. I really do. That's the challenge for me, to just see it as a practical physical activity. I definitely draw many, many connections, and always enjoy these conversations as well.
Well, we will do it again.
Yeah.
See you. Hey, all, thank you for joining in and listening to that conversation with Kate Fletcher. I just hope you took away as much from that conversation as I did, and I do every time I talk with her. She's just one of those people that You can't walk away from a conversation without being at least changed a little bit, without having looked a little deeper into yourself and into life. And I could interview her every day of the week and probably learn something new every time. But this time in the interview, if you were moved by it, if you were inspired by her and this cause, there will be a link attached wherever you're picking up this podcast where you can go support her GoFundMe and the scholarship fund effort to support some of the students that she teaches up there in Louisa High School. So March 29th, this Friday, let's wish Kate good luck. Let's follow her journey and root her on. And I really hope big things happen for her and these students. So thank you, Kate, for coming back on and spending some time with us again. You are an inspiration. Until the next time, all of you, I hope you all have a great week. If you're out there running, run hard, right? Don't need to be racing, like Kate said. Just get out there and run and just take in what it can do for your life. If you're not a runner, maybe some of these conversations will make you give a second thought about it. Maybe running's not your thing. Just get out there, walk a little bit, or cheer somebody else on. It's just a beautiful world to be a part of one way or another. So I invite you in. And if you enjoyed this conversation, I invite you back. Until next time, you have a great week.
And I can't stop.